What if the very things you overshare are the ones quietly draining your energy? What if the moment you opened up thinking it would bring you closer to someone actually pulled you further away from your true self? Pause for a second. Have you ever shared something deeply personal and later felt exposed, even violated? That kind of regret doesn't just come from people betraying your trust. Sometimes it comes from you crossing your own internal boundary before you were ready. We live in a culture that glorifies vulnerability and radical honesty. Be authentic, they say. Speak your truth. But what if some truths aren't meant to be spoken out loud, at least not yet? What if sharing too much too soon is less about being real and more about losing the sacred Carl Jung? One of the most influential minds in modern psychology believed that certain parts of ourselves are not meant for public display, not because they're shameful, but because they're still in formation. These parts belong to what Jung called the shadow aspects of our psyche that need time, space, and quiet to evolve. To speak them before they're ripe is to risk misunderstanding, or worse, spiritual fragmentation. We're not talking about hiding your truth. We're talking about protecting your truth the way a seed needs soil and silence before it can break into blossom. So in this video, we're going to explore 9 powerful truths that Carl Jung believed you should keep to yourself, not out of fear or secrecy, but out of self-respect and soul preservation. This isn't about censorship, it's about discernment, because not every part of you is meant for the world to see. Some truths are meant to be processed, not posted. Some wounds need warmth, not witnesses, and some dreams require quiet before they are ready to be born. So if you've ever felt drained after opening up, if you've ever questioned whether your vulnerability is a gift or a leak, you're not alone. This video might just help you draw a sacred boundary around your energy, not to push the world away, but to make space for who you're still becoming. Let's begin with something we all carry but rarely handle. With care, our deepest insecurities. These are not just passing doubts or surface-level flaws. They're the quiet wounds that formed in childhood, moments when we were told we weren't enough, moments when love came with conditions, moments when we learned often silently that being ourselves wasn't safe. Carl Jung referred to this as the beginning of the shadow, the side of the self we disown in order to survive. And when these hidden fears go unexamined, they become what he called shadow seeds, subconscious programs quietly running the show behind our choices, relationships, and self-worth. Here's the problem. In today's world of oversharing, we're encouraged to be vulnerable and speak our truth. But if you expose your rawest wounds before they've been processed, you don't heal them, you hand them over to the wrong people. People who might judge them, dismiss them, exploit them. Imagine someone opens up about a childhood trauma to a friend or partner early in a relationship, hoping to feel closer, but instead of empathy, they're met with silence, or worse, subtle criticism. Now the wound isn't just reopened, it's reinforced, and the message becomes, "See, I really am too much." That's the danger of oversharing your shadows before they've found their light. You give someone else the power to define your pain, and sometimes that can set your healing back years. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires you to integrate these shadow pieces gradually. That means witnessing them, feeling them, and learning from them within before placing them in someone else's hands. Does that mean you should never talk about your wounds? Of course not. but it does mean you need to be discerning. Not everyone deserves access to the most fragile parts of you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is sit with your insecurity, name it without shame, and choose not to explain it to anyone until you understand it yourself. Because here's the truth: what you keep sacred begins to transform. What you overexpose often stays stuck in the same cycle. So ask yourself, have you ever shared something deeply painful, hoping it would bring you closer to someone, but ended up feeling more alone? That experience wasn't a failure. It was a lesson in energetic boundaries. And Jung would say, it's a sign you're ready to build a stronger relationship with your inner self before seeking external validation. So remember this: your deepest insecurities are not shameful. They're powerful indicators of where healing is most needed, but they are also sacred. And like sacred things, they deserve privacy until they are ready to be honored out loud. Now let's move into the realm that most people never talk about out loud: your spiritual or mystical experiences. Have you ever had a moment so surreal, so beyond logic, that it made you question everything you thought you knew? Maybe it happened during a near-death experience, or in deep meditation, or during an ordinary moment that suddenly felt divine. And then you tried to explain it, but the words didn't land. Maybe you were met with silence, or a chuckle, or that familiar look that says, "You're imagining things." Suddenly that sacred experience didn't feel so sacred anymore. Carl Jung understood this well. He believed that true spiritual insight must first be integrated internally before it can be expressed externally. Because when you speak too soon before fully understanding the meaning behind the experience, you risk diluting its power, or worse, having it dismissed by someone who simply isn't ready to hear it. Jung called this a form of inner alchemy, a private process where what was once chaotic or mysterious slowly takes shape within the psyche. It's not about secrecy for secrecy's sake. It's about protection during transformation. Think of it like this: if a butterfly tried to emerge before its wings were fully formed, it wouldn't fly, it would fall. Your spiritual awakening is no different. I remember someone telling me they once felt a presence while sitting alone under the stars. Not a ghost, not a hallucination, just a knowing. They felt connected to everything and nothing all at once. But when they told their partner, it was dismissed as woo-woo nonsense. They never spoke about it again. And a part of them, the intuitive, sensitive, mystical part, shut down. How often do we do this to ourselves? We censor the divine because we're afraid of being judged. We shrink our insight to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. But here's what Jung would say: the psyche contains elements that are numinous, sacred, unexplainable, and not meant for casual conversation. They're meant to guide you inward, not impress others. So if you've had a moment that felt larger than life, otherworldly, or spiritually charged, don't rush to share it. Sit with it. Journal about it. Ask, what part of me awakened in that moment? What truth was being whispered to my soul? Because the truth is, sharing your mystical experience with someone who isn't grounded enough to receive it doesn't just waste your energy. It can disconnect you from your own inner voice. In a world obsessed with external validation, it takes real strength to guard your sacred knowing. To trust that what you experienced was real because it changed you, not because someone else agreed. So let me ask you, have you ever had an experience you couldn't explain but felt undeniably true? And did you share it or protect it? Remember, not everything profound needs to be public. Some truths aren't meant to be proven. They're meant to be honored. Let's move on to the next one. Have you ever shared a dream, something deeply personal, something that lit a fire inside you, only to feel that fire flicker out after someone reacted with doubt or silence? Maybe it was a business idea, a creative pursuit, a decision to start over, and as soon as you shared it, you felt the magic slip away. Carl Jung believed that our deepest goals emerge from the individuation process, the psychological journey toward becoming who we truly are. These goals aren't just ambitions, they're soul-level signals, invitations from the unconscious to create something meaningful and uniquely yours. But here's the warning Jung would give us. When you share your long-term goals too early, before they've fully taken shape within you, leak energy. You expose a fragile vision to a world that may not be ready to receive it. In Jungian terms, your dream is still in its symbolic gestation phase. It lives inside the subconscious as an idea, an image, a pull toward something more. And like any sacred process, it needs protection before it's exposed to the outside world. Think about a seed. If you dig it up every day to show someone how it's growing, it won't grow. It needs darkness. It needs patience. It needs to root itself deeply before breaking the surface. The same applies to your dreams. I once spoke to someone who dreamed of starting a trauma-informed coaching practice. She'd done the training, she had the heart, and her vision was clear. But when she shared the idea with a close friend, the response was flat. Really, that's niche. You sure people would pay for that? She smiled and nodded, but inside, something shifted. She didn't quit, but she slowed down. Doubt crept in, and the next time we spoke, she was still thinking about it. That's the cost of premature sharing. Jung emphasized that creative and soulful ideas must be incubated, first held closely, and nourished from within, because until you believe in them completely, the wrong comment can derail your progress. Even with good intentions, people often project their own limitations onto your path. So how do you know when it's safe to share? The answer is simple. When the vision is no longer a question but a knowing. When you can hear skepticism and stay grounded. When your belief is louder than their doubt. Until then, keep it close. Write about it. Visualize it. Build it in silence. Not because you're hiding, but because you're honoring the sacred space where real transformation begins. Let me ask you this. What's a dream you've quietly carried, one that feels too tender to speak aloud? Have you ever watched it fade after telling the wrong person? Your dreams are not meant for public approval. They're meant for personal alignment. Protecting them isn't selfish. It's smart. It's sacred. Let's continue. The next one will take us even deeper. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever done something truly kind without expecting anything in return? No cameras, no applause, no announcement. Just the quiet decision to be good, even when no one was watching. Carl Jung believed that true character is revealed not in public gestures but in private moments. According to Jung, when kindness is used to inflate the ego, to craft an identity of being a good person, it loses its spiritual purity. It becomes performance, and performance always demands an audience. In Jungian psychology, this is the danger of ego inflation, a subtle but powerful distortion, where the ego uses even noble behavior to feel superior. You donate, then tweet about it. You help a stranger, then bring it up at every dinner party. You forgive, then remind everyone how gracious you were. The act may still look good on the outside, but internally something sacred is lost. Jung believed in the integration of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we often suppress or deny. And ironically, one of the most overlooked shadows is the need to be seen as virtuous. Yes, even virtue can be a mask. Let me give you a real example. A man once told me he quietly paid off the lunch debts of several children in his local school district. No one knew, not even his spouse. He said, "I didn't do it to feel good. I did it because I could." When I asked why he never shared it, he smiled and said, "Because if I share it, it becomes about me, and it was never about me." That's soul-aligned kindness, a concept Jung would say arises from the self, not the ego. It's the kind of act that feeds your inner wholeness, not your image. Now, I'm not saying all sharing is wrong. Sometimes stories inspire others. But there's a difference between inspiration and validation seeking. So here's the deeper question. Are you sharing to uplift or to be uplifted by attention? Because in a world driven by likes and praise, protecting your quiet goodness becomes a radical form of self-preservation. It keeps your heart pure, it deepens your relationship with your own values, and it allows the act itself to stand as enough. Jung warned that if the ego begins to dominate your sense of self-worth, even in good deeds, you start losing the essence of individuation. Instead of becoming your truest self, you become a projection of how you want to be seen. So here's the practice. Do good, then let it go. Let the moment dissolve into silence. Let the universe hold it for you. Let your own soul bear witness. Because when kindness doesn't need to be remembered, that's when it becomes unforgettable. What's one act of goodness you've done in silence, something that no one knows but you? Hold that memory close, not as a trophy, but as proof that your spirit is stronger than your need to be praised. Let's move to the next one. It's about something even more emotionally charged: betrayal. Let's be honest, families are complicated. Even the most loving ones carry shadows. Unspoken trauma, old wounds passed down like heirlooms, silent rivalries, shameful secrets, emotional distance dressed up as tradition. And when you've lived through it, there's often a deep, aching urge to speak it out loud, to finally say, "This happened, and it hurt." But before you do, Jung would ask, are you speaking to heal or to release pressure? Carl Jung introduced the concept of the collective unconscious, a vast reservoir of inherited emotions, stories, and struggles. Within families, this plays out as intergenerational patterns: addiction, silence, blame, repetition. So when you share your family's deepest struggles with the world, you're not just telling your story, you're exposing a system, one that likely shaped you before you had words for it. Here's the danger. If shared with the wrong person or at the wrong time, it can lead to labels. Suddenly, you're the person from the broken family, or worse. People start defining your worth by your origin, not your evolution. I remember a woman who once opened up during a group therapy session about her father's abuse and her mother's denial. She didn't cry, she just said it plainly, and you could see the discomfort flood the room, not compassion, but judgment. Afterward, she told me, "I wish I had said less, because now that's all they see when they look at me." This is what Jung warned about. When you externalize wounds before you've internalized their meaning, the world doesn't always respond with healing. He believed that family wounds are symbolic. They're not just events, they're archetypes. The tyrant father, the absent mother, the scapegoated child. These live within us, and the real work is not exposing them, but integrating them. That doesn't mean staying silent forever. It means choosing the right time, the right space, and the right level of self-understanding before making them public. Because once the story is out there, it's no longer just yours. It gets interpreted, misinterpreted, recycled, and sometimes weaponized. So what should you do instead? First, honor your story in private. Journal it. Speak it with a therapist. Walk through it not as a victim, but as someone reclaiming authorship of their life. Second, notice the intention. Are you sharing to blame, to shock, or to understand? When you reach a point where your story no longer triggers rage, shame, or the need to justify, it might be ready to be shared. But until then, protect it, not out of fear, but out of respect for yourself, for your family's humanity, even in its brokenness, and for the sacred process of healing that doesn't need to be on display to be real. Remember, you're not responsible for fixing your family's past, but you are responsible for breaking the cycle in your future. And sometimes, the first act of healing is silence. What's one story from your family that you've carried for too long? What would it feel like to give it space to breathe without forcing it into the world? Hold on to that thought as we now explore something equally personal. Your romantic life and why it might be wiser to keep some of it to yourself. Let's take a breath here, because this next one dives deep into a territory many people avoid, even in silence. Our romantic fantasies and hidden desires. Now let's be clear, desire in itself is not shameful. It's human. It's the raw, unfiltered pulse of your inner world. But according to Jung, when these desires remain unconscious and are shared too soon or with the wrong person, they can become distorted mirrors that reflect more confusion than connection. Jung often spoke of the unconscious, not just as a place of repressed trauma, but as a reservoir of instinct energy and symbolic imagery. In that deep pool lives your sexual archetypes, emotional attachments, even idealized versions of love that may or may not be grounded in reality. So why does Jung caution against sharing them too freely? Because when desires are unprocessed, they aren't just misunderstood, they can be projected. You might think you're expressing an authentic truth, but what you're really doing is handing someone a fragile part of your psyche and hoping they'll understand something you haven't fully understood yourself. Let's look at a real-life example. Imagine someone opening up on a second date, sharing their fantasies about what love should feel like. Intense, spiritual, passionate, maybe even a bit chaotic. They believe they're being honest. But to the listener, it might feel overwhelming, even disorienting. The other person might think, are they in love with me or with a story they've built in their head? Jung would say, that's the danger of projecting desire before integrating it. Desires, especially romantic ones, are not just feelings. They're blueprints written by your experiences, wounds, unmet needs, and hidden hopes. If you don't read them carefully before sharing, they can shape how others see you, or worse, how you see yourself. And here's the deeper truth. Sometimes when we reveal our deepest romantic dreams, we're not inviting connection. We're seeking validation. We want someone to say, yes, you're lovable just like that. But true validation doesn't come from premature exposure. It comes from first accepting that your desires are yours to explore, reflect on, and evolve internally. Carl Jung believed in the process of individuation, becoming whole, by integrating all parts of yourself, especially the hidden ones. Your fantasies are a gateway to your psyche. They're symbolic messages, not prescriptions, and they're meant to guide you toward self-awareness, not necessarily toward confession. So what should you do with them? Start by being curious, write them down, ask where they come from. Is that fantasy about intimacy? Or about finally being seen? Is that desire for passion, or for power, or safety, or freedom? And only when you've asked those questions, when you've honored the meaning beneath the imagery, should you even consider sharing it with someone else. Because the truth is, your desires are sacred, not because they're scandalous, but because they hold a mirror to the parts of you still becoming. When you share them too early, they can lose their shape. When you hold them with care, they can transform into wisdom. So here's a question to reflect on. Is your desire asking to be expressed or to be understood? First, coming up next, we'll talk about something equally powerful. Why the battles you've fought in silence might not be stories you need to share with everyone. Let me ask you something quietly but directly. Have you ever felt proud of something you haven't done yet? Maybe you told someone, I'm going to start volunteering soon, or next year I'm planning to mentor younger people, or even one day I'll open a shelter, write a book, start a foundation. You feel inspired just by saying it. You feel like you've already taken a step toward being that person. But according to Jung, this well-meaning act of voicing our future goodness too soon can become a trap. Not because your intention isn't real, but because words, when not followed by action, can substitute effort with illusion. Here's the psychological nuance Jung would point out. When you talk about the good you plan to do before you've done it, your mind sometimes mistakes saying for doing. It releases a bit of the emotional reward up front, so much so that your urgency to act quietly fades. This is a phenomenon in behavioral psychology too. It's called the social reality substitution effect. You declare a noble goal out loud, others nod or applaud, and your brain registers a premature sense of achievement. That dopamine hit. It feels just enough like progress to delay actual progress. Jung, in his theory of individuation, believed that real transformation is often silent inward and unvalidated, at least at first. When you start sharing your plans too early, you risk exposing them to the world's noise, skepticism, doubt, comparison, even distraction. And sometimes, that's all it takes for a dream to die quietly. Let me give you an example. I once met someone who had this beautiful idea to create an after-school program for kids in underserved neighborhoods. They told everyone, friends, co-workers, even acquaintances on social media. The responses were enthusiastic. That's amazing. So inspiring. Months went by. Then years. The program never launched. Why? Because the emotional reward of being perceived as good became more comfortable than the hard, slow, unglamorous reality of making it happen. Jung would likely say, real virtue doesn't need an audience. It needs incubation. Like a seed in soil, your intentions deserve the quiet protection of time, space, and consistent action. Too much light, too soon. And the roots don't take. So here's a gentle reminder, especially if you're someone with a big heart and even bigger visions. You don't need to announce your goodness to become it. You just need to live it step by quiet step. There's power in doing before declaring, in letting your work speak for you, in showing up when no one's clapping, because that's where integrity is born, not in applause, but in alignment. Now let's flip the question inward. What's one good thing you've dreamed of doing, but haven't shared yet? What if just for once you didn't post about it, didn't tell a soul? What if you just started? Maybe that's the shift Jung was pointing toward, from ego-driven storytelling to soul-aligned doing, and maybe just maybe. The most sacred acts of goodness are the ones whispered only between you and the universe. In the next section, we'll talk about why your inner battles, the emotional storms you face silently, might also be something worth protecting. Let me ask you something that may feel uncomfortable but necessary. Have you ever shared a painful experience too soon and felt worse, not better afterward? It's a common belief in our world today. Speak your truth, tell your story, let it out. And yes, there is healing in expression. But not all expression is healing. Not when the wound is still open. Not when it hasn't been understood, held, or integrated yet. Carl Jung warned us about this. He believed that unprocessed trauma, what he called psychic wounds, live in the shadow. And when we expose that shadow prematurely, especially in environments that aren't safe or empathetic, we don't release the pain. We relive it. This is what Jung referred to as re-traumatization through projection. When you share trauma that hasn't been fully digested within yourself, you're not really sharing from wisdom, you're sharing from hurt. And often what you get back is misunderstanding, awkward silence, or even judgment. And suddenly the pain feels worse, deeper, more isolating. I'll give you a real example. A woman once told me that she opened up about her childhood abuse to a new friend. She wasn't ready. It was her first time ever saying it out loud. She expected comfort, but the friend froze, didn't know what to say, and quickly changed the subject. She walked away feeling ashamed, invalidated, and like her pain had just been confirmed as too much. Jung would have said, "Do not confuse exposure with liberation. Just because something is said aloud doesn't mean it's released. Real healing often requires silence first, the sacred, protected kind of silence. So what should you do with your unhealed pain? Hold it not in suppression, but in sacred containment. Create space for it within yourself before you put it in someone else's hands." That might mean journaling, therapy, long walks with your thoughts, or even inner conversations with your younger self. Because here's a truth that isn't talked about enough. Not everyone deserves to hear your pain. Not because your story isn't valid, but because your healing is precious. It deserves to happen on your terms, not as a reaction to loneliness or desperation for connection. There's a quote I keep close. When the wound is still bleeding, don't hand it to someone else to carry. They may not know how to hold it, and it may spill everywhere. Jung's path of individuation is not about disclosure, it's about transformation, and transformation takes time. Before we externalize our stories, we must internalize their meaning. So if there's a trauma in your life that's still raw, still aching, give it the respect it deserves. Nurture it quietly. Don't rush to explain it, post it, or perform it for applause. Ask yourself, is this being shared for healing or for validation? Is this a safe place or just a loud one? There is nothing wrong with wanting to be seen, but healing doesn't begin when you are seen. It begins when you are seen by yourself. In our final point, we'll talk about one of the most misunderstood forms of silence. Why even your most profound insights about life and the universe might also be worth keeping quietly sacred. Let's talk about the thoughts you never say out loud, the ones that scare you a little, the ones that come uninvited like a whisper in the dark. What if I'm not a good person? What if I'm jealous? What if I want to hurt someone who hurt me? We all have them. And yet we panic when they appear. We rush to confess them, dump them on someone else, or worse, deny them completely. But Carl Jung had a very different approach. He believed these thoughts are not shameful. They are invitations, invitations to meet the shadow, the part of us that we repress, reject, or fear. Jung taught that real psychological growth begins not when we hide these thoughts and not even when we speak them impulsively, but when we sit with them, observe them, and ask, where did this come from? See, shadow thoughts are rarely about the outside world. They are reflections of an inner war. And when we share them too soon without understanding them, we risk causing confusion, fear, or even damage to ourselves and others. Let's make this real. Imagine someone feels a burst of resentment toward a friend's success. That fleeting voice, why them and not me? If they speak it without context, they might be labeled bitter or envious. But if they reflect on it, if they ask, why does this success trigger me? What unmet need or past wound does it awaken? Then that thought becomes a doorway, a path to deeper self-knowledge, not shame. Jung warned that the shadow isn't evil, it's undigested. It's the emotional material we never fully processed: anger, fear, lust, rage, insecurity. When ignored, it leaks out through projection and self-sabotage. When faced with maturity, it becomes power. So what happens when you share these dark thoughts before they've been understood? 3 things. You lose the opportunity to grow. You hand the responsibility of interpreting your shadow to someone else. You risk being misunderstood. Others might take your moment of inner conflict and turn it into a fixed judgment of your character. You weaken your own container. Jung believed the psyche is a vessel, and unprocessed emotion poured out too quickly cracks that vessel. Instead of sharing to be relieved, try this. Write it down. Talk to your therapist. Meditate on it. Ask, is this thought asking for expression or exploration? Is this reaction truly mine or a ghost from my past? Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is what makes you strong, not the absence of darkness, but the courage to walk through it without flinching and without needing to explain it to everyone you meet. You don't owe the world every unfinished thought. Some truths require integration, not explanation. Some thoughts are meant to be understood in solitude before they are ever spoken in company. So if you've had a thought that unsettled you lately, don't be afraid of it. Trace it. Learn its language. What does it reveal about your unmet needs? Your hidden fears, your unclaimed power? That's the work of individuation. That's how the unconscious becomes conscious. That's how you become whole. Let's bring this full circle. The most powerful parts of you, the ones that hold your dreams, your wounds, your visions, and even your darkness, are not always meant to be seen by everyone. They're not secrets to hide in shame. They are sacred spaces, places within you that deserve integration, not exposure, protection, not performance. Carl Jung once said, what you resist persists, what you accept transforms. And maybe that's the deepest truth of all. Healing doesn't always happen in public. Sometimes it begins in silence, in the quiet moments where you choose to hold your truth instead of handing it away too soon, where you choose not to broadcast your becoming but to honor it. There's strength in that, in not needing to be fully understood, in not rushing to explain every layer of yourself, in simply being okay with evolving behind closed doors. So I'll ask you something not to answer out loud, but to sit with. What is one thing you've learned to protect, not to hide, but to honor? Is it a vision for your future? A piece of your past you're still working through? A part of you that's still unfolding? Whatever it is, give it time, give it space, and most importantly, give it your respect, because not everything beautiful grows in the sunlight. Some things grow in the dark, in the privacy of your soul, until they're strong enough to face the world on their own terms. And if this video resonated with you, if you find yourself on this quiet journey of self-awareness healing and personal transformation, then I invite you to join this community. Hit subscribe if you're walking the path of becoming your truest self at your own pace in your own way. And comment with a single word, a word that represents something you're choosing to hold close, not in secrecy, but in reverence. Maybe your word is courage, stillness, hope, grief, or truth. Whatever it is, let it be yours. This isn't just a video. This is a moment to reclaim your energy, to protect what's sacred, and to grow in the direction of your own becoming, because some parts of you are too important to be shared.